When they had finished, Tricky took a walk round the shining bowls, licking casually inside one or two of them. Next day, an extra bowl was put out for him, and I was pleased to see him jostling his way towards it. From then on, his progress was rapid. He had no medical treatment of any kind, but all day he ran about with the dogs, joining in their friendly scrimmages. He discovered the joys of being bowled over, trampled on, and squashed every few minutes. He became an accepted member of the gang, an unlikely, silky little object among the shaggy crew, fighting like a tiger for his share at mealtimes and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. He had never had such a time in his life. When all other dogs finished their food, Tricky went around looking at the shining bowls and also licked a few bowls. He used to lick one or two bowls. The very next day, an extra bowl was put for him, and the narrator was happy to see him running towards his bowl. So, he doesn't know to eat from the same bowl, so an extra bowl was kept for Tricky. Then he started getting better really quickly, and he did not require any medicines and started playing with the other dogs the whole day. And they all used to play with each other, bump into each other, walk over each other, and squash each other. All of the other dogs accepted him as a family member, although he was very different from others, as he was very well taken care of by his own honor, and others were not. He was a very silky object, but the others were the creepy, the dull looking objects. And he also used to fight for his meals with his fellow dogs, were very larger in size compared to him. And at night, he would also hunt rats in the hen house. And he was enjoying all this as he had never done such things ever in his life. All the while, Mrs. Pamphry hovered anxiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletins. I dodged the questions about whether his cushions were being turned regularly or his correct cot worn according to the weather. But I was able to tell her that the little fellow was out of danger and convulsing rapidly. The word convulsing seemed to do something to Mrs. Pamphry. She started to bring round fresh eggs, 2 dozen at a time, to build up Tricky's strength. For a happy period, my partners and I had 2 eggs each for breakfast. But when the bottles of wine began to arrive, the real possibilities of the situation began to dawn on the household. It was to enrich Tricky's blood. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion with 2 glasses of wine before and several during the meal. Here, this part is a little bit funny part. So all this while, Mrs. Pamphry used to call more than 12 times a day to inquire about Tricky. And the doctor used to avoid questions about the cots, about the beds and so on. And he told her that Tricky was doing very good and was recovering very fast. He told the truth. And Mrs. Pamphry wanted Tricky to recover fast. And for that, what she started doing, she started sending 2 dozen eggs every day for him. But what had happened? Mr. Harriet and his partners used to take 2 eggs each for breakfast. So they were not giving this to the dog. They were having it. And then to improve the quality of blood, Mrs. Pamphry started sending in bottles of wine. Then it became Mr. Harriet's habit to have 2 glasses of wine before lunch and a few along with it. So the wine and the eggs that were for the dogs were actually consumed by the doctor and his partners. We would hardly believe it when the brandy came to put a final edge on Tricky's constitution. For a few nights, the fine spirit was rolled around, inhaled, and reverently drunk. They were days of deep content, starting well with an extra egg in the morning, improved and sustained by the midday wine, and finishing luxuriously round the fire with the brandy. It was a temptation to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest. But I knew Mrs. Pamphry was suffering, and after a fortnight, felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered and was awaiting collection. Mrs. Pamphry now started sending in brandy. So, in addition to wine, now they are getting brandy. And brandy is an alcohol that improves the quality of the blood if taken in proper amount. And at that time, Mr. Harriet was not able to believe that Mrs. Pamphry actually wanted them to give brandy to the dog. And they shared it among themselves. Obviously, they are not going to give to this dog. And some days, Mr. Harriet used to feel very happy as he would start his day with extra eggs. Then he would have a few glasses of wine in the afternoon and then ending the day with brandy in the evening. And because of all these things that were being sent for Tricky, Mr. Harriet was really tempted to keep him as a permanent guest. And he really wanted that Tricky should stay with them forever. But then he realized that Mrs. Pamphry, who was like a mother to Tricky, was really suffering and really wanted Tricky to come back soon. So after 15 days, fortnight means 15 days, Tricky was ready to go back home and Mr. Harriet called up Mrs. Pamphry to come and pick him. Within minutes, about 30 feet of gleaming black metal drew up outside the surgery. The chauffeur opened the door and I could just make out of the figure of Mrs. Pamphry almost lost in the interior. Her hands were tightly clasped in front of her. Her lips trembled. "Oh, Mr. Harriet, do tell me the truth. Is he really better?" "Yes, he's fine. There is no need for you to get out of the car. I will go and fetch him." I walked through the house into the garden. A mass of dogs were hurtling round and round the lawn, and in their midst, ears flapping, tail waving, was the little golden figure of Tricky. In 2 weeks, he had been transformed into a little, hard-muscled animal. He was keeping up well with the pack, stretching out in great bounds, his touch almost brushing the ground. I carried him back along the passage to the front of the house. So after making a call to Mrs. Pamphry, within a few minutes, a long black car came outside, a luxurious car. And when the chauffeur, means the private car driver, a driver, opened the door, Mrs. Pamphry was sitting inside really nervous as well as excited. And she was asking with the nervousness in her voice that was Tricky really better to go with them? And the doctor replied very positively that he is all good, nothing to worry. Then Mr. Harriet went inside to get Tricky, and when Mr. Harriet went to the garden behind the house, he saw all the dogs moving around in the garden. And Tricky was sitting between them, and he had recovered wonderfully in these 2 weeks. Fortnight already we have told. So within these 2 weeks, he had just recovered drastically. And he was looking much healthier, playing with the other dogs, and his chest was touching the ground. That his chubbiness has all gone. And he had become a very good muscular dog within these 2 weeks. I carried him back along the passage to the front of the house. The chauffeur was still holding the car door open, and when Tricky saw his mistress, he took off from my arms in a tremendous leap and sailed into Mrs. Pamphry's lap. She gave a startled "Oh!" and then had to defend herself as he swarmed over her, licking her face and barking. During the excitement, I helped the chauffeur to bring out the beds, toys, cushions, cards, and bowls, none of which had been used. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pamphry leaned out of the window. Tears shone in her eyes. Her lips trembled. "Oh, Mr. Harriet," she cried. How can I ever thank you? This is a triumph of surgery. When the doctor took Tricky out of the house, in front of the house, he saw that the chauffeur was still holding the door of the car. And as soon as Tricky saw his mother, like Mrs. Pamphry, he was overjoyed. And he ran away and jumped into the lap of Mrs. Pamphry and started licking her face and barking in excitement. And while all this was happening, the chauffeur and Mr. Heroid got all his stuff, like the beds, the cushions, and all, out to the car, which had not been used during the treatment, like for the last 14 days. And when Mrs. Pamphry was leaving, she leaned out of the window and said to Mr. Heroid with tears of joy in her eyes that she could not thank him enough for what he had done to her. And she exclaimed, "This is a triumph of surgery. This is a victory of surgery. This is the greatness of surgery." Meant that the treatment that was given to Tricky had been very successful. So this is all about the story, and I hope you understood completely. And if you have any doubt, please do clarify the earliest. Thank you for watching.